Recording started.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Matrexit discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. Tonight is going to be a part two, a continuation from last week. We're talking about the rabbit holes, because there's plenty of little rabbit holes people discover when they finally find out that things aren't constructed around them quite the way they thought, and that, quite possibly everything has really been a lie. Even if you get down to your sacred cows of whatever religion you were brought up in or weren't brought up in, whichever. So, like I said, this really should have been probably a part one and done last week and done in reverse. But either way, this is going to be a little bit of a explanation, I think, that was needed for what I went over last week. Because, I'm sorry if this destroys any previous or newly held beliefs, because we do stumble into some newly held beliefs in these rabbit holes we encounter. And it seems like, unfortunately, people tend to cling onto those even tighter than they did their old patriot mythology or whatever the case may be. And like I said last week, this is really about things that people have grabbed onto, essentially because they were never taught. And when you're not taught, say, a big subject such as law, for instance, then you're likely going to cling on to anything that sounds legitimate, even though it might not necessarily be legitimate. That's actually the definition of pseudo law, because you don't know anything about it, so you think, okay, well, this must be true. It's just like if a cook or somebody that wants to cook something sees a recipe, they're going to follow it. They're not going to stop and think how legitimate something sounds or doesn't sound. Is this an excess of sugar, or is the sugar added to a part of the recipe or a timing in the cooking process that it shouldn't be added to, because they don't really know the chemical constructs of how sugars work, for instance, in baking or cooking. Sugars are actually probably the hardest topic for people to learn, like when they're in chef school, confectionery. Very, very difficult stuff. So if people see something and they don't really know anything about cooking, they're just going to follow that recipe verbatim. They're not even stopping to think whether this is correct or not. And the same thing happens with people saying things regarding law and hearing things such as registration turns over ownership. If you don't know anything about it, yeah, that might sound legit, especially when they say, oh, it's the word regis, which has to stand with royalty, and you're turning it over to the king, and all that nonsense. When really we know that ownership deals with title and possession. Possession is 90%, and the actual title itself is 10%. But the title, that 10%, is actually the strongest. And neither of those have anything to do with registration. I find it interesting that we mature growing up from being children, thinking that mud pies, for instance, are really a pie. We do grow up from that. But for some reason, people don't grow up from their beliefs in some of this pseudo law, thinking that it's really law. Law is really no different than, say, quasi law or color of law. Same premise right there. Unfortunately, people really don't stop and dig into it and find the moving parts that really lay behind it and what's really going on to see if something's legitimate or not. Like I said, this is just simply a result of people not being educated about law. And it's not necessarily just a lack of education. It's, the lack of education really gives huge profits to the judicial society. And I hear a lot of people say, we've been misled or we're mistaught, or since it wasn't given to us, that this is a fault of the educational system. When we have to realize it's really not the fault of anyone other than ourselves. Our education, number one, is our duty. It's nobody else's duty to educate us. It's our duty to educate ourselves. And like I said, this does give a huge profit to the Judicial Society. A good example of this would be why mothers are given custody in a custody battle. And when you think custody and custody battle, where does custody come from? Where's that word come from? It comes from custodian. You're fighting to be the custodian over property. Well, who is a custodian? What does a custodian do? A custodian is somebody that watches over someone else's property. Something to kind of think about. But mothers are most generally given the custody over the offspring, and it kind of sounds like, law of nature reasons that would make the most sense. But in reality, what's being done is a setup to fail situation. Because since the males generally make the most money, then that means a court can make more money off the man fighting for the rights for that property in court. That should kind of make sense to people. They want to be the parent. Think about that word, parent, pay rent. So that's all it's about. It's about money and who can yield the most revenue for the courts. Look at that word revenue. Revenue. Essentially, in that situation, what they're doing is revenuing the money from the man's pocket to the coffers of the court. Simple stuff when you really stop and think about it. One thing that I haven't brought up really, and I do have people ask me about this from time to time, and this is something that I never hear anybody else discuss when it comes to their purpose for learning law or their purpose for trying to find that nexus between them and the state and what to do about it, how to correct it or how to clarify it. And the thing that I don't ever hear anybody bring up is their relationship with their creator. And this was probably the biggest purpose behind why I went on this journey myself. What will you do should this situation arise? What would you do if that day were to come where you're standing in front of the creator and you have to answer for your life? When you're going along with a system that is nothing but a destructive system, it's an adversarial system. We know who the great adversary is. How would you answer when you're asked why you participated, why you didn't do anything about your relationship or the presumptions that were being made about who your God really was? That's something to think about. And I think that would be the backbone behind why I went into this journey and started looking at things, because that particular idea is never really presented to people. It's something I think you have to kind of stop and ponder and come about on your own. All right. There's a common question, and to go into some of these rabbit holes, because I'm just going to touch on a few of them tonight. One that I think lays at the heart of most of it, which is contract law. But there's one common question that people often see, especially if you're really green to this, if you're a newbie, whatever the case may be, you're trying to get away from the normies, or whatever you want to call it. But the question is, who is the state? This is a popular one by Carl Lentz, and he'll say, well, where is the man or woman who is my accuser? I need to be able to face my accuser. How can I face the state? It's not possible for me to face the state. In fact, I was watching an interesting live video the other day, and it was with a gentleman that He just got out of prison. He'd been in for like 14 years, but I think he was sentenced to like 25 years. And he was talking to somebody else that he had met while he was in prison. And this was an argument that this gentleman said that he was having with his attorney, and he wanted that brought up in court. And his attorney just laughed. He said, listen, if you're going to ask the courts, where is my accuser? Where is the state? I want to be able to see the state. He said, trust me, they will bring somebody forward. And this should really be kind of a red flag to people. This should really be an answer to people when they stop and think about this idea. Because what it boils down to really is representation. Because everybody in that room is in some form of representation. The judge is representing the state, like I've said, so is the clerk representing the county and the state, so is the prosecutor, the represent. What makes you think that you're the odd man out, that you're the only one in the room not acting in the capacity of representation? Because you absolutely are. You really are representing. A lot of people say, oh, I'm not representing, I'm presenting. No, you're representing. You're representing the legal entity created by the state. Exactly what you're doing. And I had a question about a book I mentioned last week. So I'd just clarify and give like the full title and the author for this book. People want to learn more about the agent-principal relationship. It's a book called A Treatise on the Law of Agency in Contract and Tort. I'll say that once more. A Treatise on the Law of Agency in Contract and Tort. And that is written by George Louis Reinhard. His last name is Reinhard. George Louis Reinhard. All right. I want to go into contract law because this lays at the heart of everything. We know that everything is contract, and contract makes the law. That's all that the courts are doing. You can put any scenario in front of me, and I will show you how the courts are doing nothing but enforcing a contract. Whether it's a contract signed in black and white, or whether it's just a social contract. Everything they're doing is enforcing a contract. And one of the things that you see from a lot of people that are new to learning and studying is you go online, go to your great Oracle, Google, DuckDuckGo, Bing, whichever it is, and you look up required elements of a contract. And that's what people are going to stand on. And for the required elements for a legal contract, people are going to find that there's offer, consideration, which is meeting of the minds, or a monetary value. There's acceptance, legal age, which would be also mental ability or capacity, full disclosure. And some people would say also that a legal contract requires 2 signatures, both parties. If that was the case for every legal contract, my question would be this: why are there multiple types of contracts? It's something to ponder. If it's that basic, why so many types? I'll give you 7 different types right now. There's an express contract, implied contract, adhesion contract, aleatory contract, unilateral contract, bilateral contracts. There's even fixed price contracts. All of those will contain some of those previous elements for a legal contract, but not all of them. Many contractual agreements really stem from trust. And what's the big thing with trust? The big thing about trust is the secretness of them, that level of secrecy that they have. Well, guess what? Any contract that you enter into that has to deal with a trust or a trust relationship is not going to provide you full disclosure. That's not required because this is stemming from a trust. Most people enter into contracts which center around being a unilateral contract. Unilateral means one-sided. It's a take it or leave it contract. It's a contract that you agreed to at the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's that contract that people enter into when it comes to even say filing taxes. It's all one-sided. Take it or leave it. You don't have a choice in the matter. It's not open for no negotiations. And guess what? You're not necessarily going to get full disclosure there as well. And when it really comes down to full disclosure, the interesting thing is that people enter into contracts constantly, but never ask or require for full disclosure. Well, if you don't require full disclosure be given to you, then guess what? They aren't required to give you the full disclosure. If full disclosure was mandatory for every single type of contract that you entered, you'd find out how many times a day you are actually contracting. And you wouldn't have time to make it through your day with all of these things because they'd have to stop and give you the laundry list for the full disclosure behind it all. And it would really complicate life. It's really your responsibility to educate yourself and know what's happening behind the scenes when it comes to full disclosure, what things they really should be telling you if you demand it from them. So I think contract law is something that affects us all so much on every level of our life, but is the most misunderstood thing in the world because it touches everybody. Nobody is going to escape entering into contracts and having to deal with that facet of life because that's the glue that makes everything work the way it's supposed to. Because people wouldn't do what they do on a regular basis. Businesses wouldn't operate the ways that they operate. The state wouldn't operate the way it operates. Road crews wouldn't operate the way they operate. Builders wouldn't do the jobs they're supposed to do if there was not a contractual obligation in place. It's the glue that really makes everything work. And that's also why that is the thing that courts are enforcing. They're enforcing the contract because there's a thought or a presentation given to them that possibly someone is not fulfilling their end of the contract. But there's also times where you might run into an unconscionable contract, which would be that there are requirements written into the contract that just are unconscionable, things that just don't make sense, things that wouldn't be physically, humanly possible to do. Like, for instance, complete a task that is known to take a week to get done, and it's written into the contract that it's going to be done within 18 hours. That would be unconscionable and would be a strong reason to void a contract. When it comes to contract, one of the things that lays at the heart of it that most people don't wrap their head around, that I've noticed, is the differences between the words void and voidable. You often hear the statement that something is void for fraud, and that fraud vitiates any contract. Well, it doesn't vitiate it. It doesn't eliminate it immediately, because if the problem isn't raised, it's laid. it's assumed to be true and that everything's okay. You have to bring it up. That just means it's voidable. Once you bring it up and bring it to the attention of the correct parties, then it can become void. But until then, it's only voidable and it still stands with authority, bottom line. So just because maybe fraud has been found in something, it's not vitiated just because the fraud's there. It's voidable. It needs to be brought to the attention of the correct parties in order to be moved from being voidable to then being void. Another big movement that I've noticed from the beginning rolls around every several years, and it's mostly because new people come into the truth scene or whatever you want to call it. And what it is, it really comes to, how you're going to get money in your pocket. And specifically, it's like the 1099 process, or even in court settings, how you can sway things into your favor. Right? One of the popular ones we're told is that you can do this with a Form 56, that you can appoint somebody to be the trustee or fiduciary with a Form 56. Well, we have to realize that you're using a Form 56, this is also involving contract. And the first thing that we have to realize about contracts is that all contracts are voluntary. You want to look at prison or jail and bring that up? Yeah, that's voluntary too. People are going there voluntarily because they volunteered into a contract. Like I said, whether it's a black and white contract or whether it's a social contract, not all contracts require a signature. In fact, the majority of them don't. We contract more through our actions than we do by putting our name on that dotted line, that disconnected line. And the main problem, really, like for instance with the Form 56, is that people don't read the instructions. You hear about some of these things, some of these ideas, things that you can do. It sounds like a silver bullet or whatever. Okay, good. You hear about going and appointing somebody as a trustee or fiduciary with a Form 56. Okay, go and look up the Form 56. All of those forms also, they all come with instructions. The first thing you want to read is the instructions. Because in the instructions for the Form 56, it is going to refer to those who have agreed to the position as trustee or fiduciary. Specifically in the matter of taxes, that's where it's most often used at. But it talks about those who have accepted that position. Like I said, you can appoint away all day long. Nobody is required to accept any appointment. You're contracting. Appointing people and accepting an appointment, this is contracting. Like I said, all contracts are voluntary, bottom line. And nobody is required to accept any appointment. I mentioned the 1099. It's the same thing with the whole 1099 process. It doesn't matter if it's the 1099 V, C, D, whatever alphabet letter you want to put after it. Read the instructions on them. Because all these forms, like I said, come with instructions. And you will find that in the instructions for any 1099 form, that these all relate to an event that has already taken place. 1099s are not used to create or initiate an event. They are used to remedy an event that has already occurred. So, again, I've seen this going way back. I'm going to mention the different names, Divine Keating, whoever. People talking about initiating an event with a 1099. That's not the way those forms work. Forms are used, doesn't matter really what form, forms are used to rectify an event from the past, something that has already occurred. So when you hear about these different ideas, Form 56, the different 1099s, conditional acceptance, go and look up the definitions of these things. Go and look up the instructions. One of the things I love about the whole conditional acceptance idea is that same situation. People are using conditional acceptance to initiate an action. Think about that word, conditional acceptance. Look at that word, acceptance. You're going back to contract law, right? Well, what are two of the main things that occur with every single contract? Offer and acceptance. Think about conditional acceptance. What comes before acceptance? An offer is made. And it's not an offer that's something just made to the general public. It's not an advertisement put out there or something like that, because there's no way for the general public to put out a general considered, acceptance for it. It's not the way things work. So you cannot use a conditional acceptance to initiate something, because an acceptance is done after an offer has been made directly to you. Then you can directly use a conditional acceptance. And like I said, it's conditional. The other party, just like any other contract, it's all voluntary. The other party does not have to accept the conditions of your acceptance. You say, I conditionally accept to do A if B happens. Okay, well, the other party says, well, we don't want B to happen, so yeah, we're not going to enter into this contract with you. Bye. We'll go to somebody else. So many of these things, so many of these rabbit holes are about forcing another party to do something. Well, what's the situation? Well, what's the problem that everybody has found themselves in, that everybody's so angry about? They're upset because they feel like they have been forced to do something that they would rather have not done. Oh, what are you doing with these forms? What are you doing in these rabbit holes? You've got the mindset, you're thinking that you can force another party to do something against their will as well. Don't fight with monsters, lest you become a monster. Same idea. What's the rest of that quote? As you stare into the abyss stares back at you. This is the way it works. So if you don't like being forced into things, what are you doing trying to do stuff to force another party into something? Like I said, that's the beauty of all of this, is that everything is voluntary. Everything is voluntary. Now, if you choose not to volunteer, it may make your life a little more inconvenient, but it's not going to kill you. Nothing's designed to kill you if you don't volunteer. You just have to start thinking creatively, thinking outside the box. How you cannot volunteer and still get what you're looking for. I'm going to kind of close out this segment because I think this is the most important part, really, is comprehending contract law. Like I've said, always learn who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. That's what you've been deceived on. Tonight, in the group Tactical Sovereignty on Facebook, I went and posted the preliminaries for the Law of Nations. I recommend people reading those. There's 28 statutes. They're all just maybe 1, 2, 3 paragraphs long each. And I recommend people read the preliminaries. for the Law of Nations. The Law of Nations is like 700 and some pages long, tough read. It was written in 1758, so yeah, it's a little tougher read than reading People magazine is today. So it's a little more difficult to wrap your mind around. But if you go and read those, I believe it's 28 statutes of the preliminaries for the Law of Nations, it will give you a really good idea as to what that book is about and how things work. Because, like I said, people are always asking, well, what should I read? Is there something I should? Yeah, to me, that would be a starting point. Because that'll explain to you the relationship between the state and other states, between you and the state, and between you and other citizens, denizens, inhabitants, suzerains, sovereigns, whatever you want to call yourself. It's a great place to start at. And I know we've got Keith, my co-host, is here with us this evening. He's been kind of ill the past few weeks, and I just wanted to get an update from him, let all you know how he's doing and what he's doing to go after the situation that he's encountered. So, sorry about that. Let me bounce over. How you doing, Keith?
Good. Greetings, everybody. As Brian said, I'm going through a little difficulty, and because what it is, of course, lung cancer has multifaceted elements of cause. It's not a disease. It's an effect of things that you've negated or have indulged in that you should or shouldn't be doing. And so I've attacked it from every aspect that I can, upping all the vitamins that I need to take, large intake, magnesium oxide, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B, all the normal stuff, K2. I've got the Rife machine for wave generation, so I can sit here and there's a little couple prods that you can just wrap to your arm and sit there and run it through a frequency program. And there's certain frequencies that will target certain illnesses, is what they say. So we're still in the middle of everything, and I think I've reached the pain threshold, though. So I think we're good there, and the progress reports from here on out will be most certainly positive. So we're gonna go to my next MRI appointments tomorrow, and hopefully I'll have some more information on Tuesday. But again, we're still kind of in the beginning stages, so it might still be that it looks like it's getting worse at this stage, and the medications just haven't started. Are just now starting to grab a hold of it enough to shrink it, and that's what we're looking for, is to get it to shrink and keep that diet regime so we can get rid of it naturally. Because if there's signs that it shrinks, then that's a sign that should tell you that you should keep going with what you're doing to keep it shrinking and avoid the surgery. Does that make sense? It's kind of similar to what's going on with the legal society. Sometimes you just got to have patience and find something that works better for you, but might not seem to be showing so much progress yet. Because I'll tell you, in this legal battle, it would seem like I lost the wheels from under me and I can't accomplish much. But that's okay, because that's how it works. You know, when you put up your dukes against the system and they say, no, we're going to take care of you, they pretty much do. They take care of everything you've got. They make it very hard to operate, to even live and function reasonably, unless you depend on them. It's a very large control factor of people that have that in their heart, and the people that want that in their heart and vote for those other people to do so. You were talking about registering to vote and stuff. I've never even registered. So there are a lot of things that each of us individually, one thing at a time, or if you can handle multiple things in accordance with it, we really need to start educating ourselves as much as possible about how to get rid of the debt that everybody's seems to think they're imposed is opposed upon them. The only debt that's imposed upon you is your own limitations. Because if you don't stand up and start educating yourself and find out that taxes are voluntary, Social Security number is voluntary, and in fact there are qualifications in both of those that says you're actually not even qualified, and therefore you're not supposed to be doing it, and that is a true crime. It does fuck up the statistical record. You know, if you see 98% of the income taxes are paid voluntarily. So if 98% of the people quit paying the taxes, how much effect would that have on it? That would mean that they're operating on 2% tax rate. That's hard to imagine. You would think that system would collapse, but it wouldn't. Think about this, folks. The Federal Reserve note has zero intrinsic value. We're not dealing with dollars. So when you start learning how to deal with dollars, there you go. There's your key. And that doesn't matter whether you're using Federal Reserve notes or a yen or what, you know. It's a 1-to-1 ratio now. And that's what you really need to learn. That's why legal tender, Federal Reserve notes today are no longer required as legal tender. In fact, they don't qualify as legal tender because it's a promise to pay. So you must use something else for legal tender, because legal tender today is negotiable instruments. Tells us you got to learn how to negotiate. To let no tongue prosper against you, you have to learn how to negotiate. Otherwise, it's telling you that nobody's up there as a trustee. You got to either get up there and act as the benefactor and shut that trust down and have all the credits transferred to your own private irrevocable trust, whatever. But you got to quit doing what you're doing. Get off your ass and do something. With that, I yield.
Absolutely, Keith. And one of the things also, I think one of the big points that we need to pay attention to, you and I talked about before we started the recording, was that a lot of these things, even in law, you know, we may have hemmed our ways in 6 ways to Sunday all through our life, which means, guess what? You're going to have to do the same thing maybe to unhem yourself. But even with your health, things that people experience later in life aren't something that is a result of something they did last week. It's been from a lifetime. It's something that's built up over a lifetime. And so guess what? You're not going to take a magic pill. You're not going to get the immediate gratification that this society wants everybody to go after. It's going to take some time to go and reverse some of these things, whether it's health-wise, legal-wise, whatever the case may be.
And that's one of the greatest gifts that we have is patience, and it's the most egregiously abused.
Absolutely.
People are such an addict that they want their shit and they want it right fucking now. Excuse my language.
We abuse our patients just like doctors abuse their patients, right?
You bet. You bet. They will stand there, look you in the eye, and tell you, yes, I will violate your living soul.
That's right. Yep. I will turn you into a profitable commodity. What kind of insurance do you have?
Well, I think that's the funny thing, though, because I think that's why they did it, because I don't have insurance.
There you go. It makes a big difference. See, I'll tell you what. I have a friend of mine, a past friend of mine, and he's since passed away. But a number of years ago, he had a heart attack. And they came to his home. They got him in time, got him to the hospital, did open heart surgery, put, I believe, 3 different stents in his heart. And after he got out of the hospital, he spent some time kind of researching online things relating to heart attacks. And he noticed, they were talking about a medication that they put people on who have stents put in them, and that you will potentially have to be on this type of medication the rest of your life. And he was reading up on all this stuff because he had a doctor's appointment coming up like 30 days after his release from the hospital. And he wanted to be able to know the language the doctor was speaking with him. And when he was at the doctor's visit, he mentioned to the doctor Hey, by the way, I'm going to need this prescription refilled. I was reading about it online, and it says once you have a stent put in you, that you have to be on this medication forever. And the doctor kind of chuckled and he said, no, he said, actually, you're fine. Just finish out that bottle and you're good to go. He said, the reason being that people have to be on the medication the rest of their life is because, number one, they typically have insurance. In your case, you did not have insurance. And since you did not have insurance, we put the type of stent in you that does not require you to be on that medication.
How convenient.
Yeah, right. And that was kind of mind blowing to him. That was an eye opener to him as to how the system really works when it comes to health.
Yeah, if they know you're rich, they're going to put you on something that's going to allow for them to keep you on medication.
Yep.
But I keep trying to I've been telling people that for all my life. Those doctors only put you on medication because they want you to come back for different kind of medication.
It's all about revenue. It's all about revenuing your assets.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thanks, Keith, for coming on. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next Sunday night. Like I always say, Sunday, the first day of the week, not the 7th, and also, therefore, not the Sabbath. Good night, folks.
Good night.